Welcome to Office Revenge Hub. Sit back and enjoy.
My company tried to destroy my reputation. What they didn't realize was that I'd rebuild it, stronger than they ever could. My name is Alex Rivera, and for 8 years I was the top sales director at Paramount Financial Services, a wealth management firm in Boston. I wasn't just good at my job, I was the best they had. I brought in 40% of the company's new clients. I built relationships that turned into millions in revenue. I was the person they wheeled out to impress investors and close impossible deals. I started at Paramount when I was 27, fresh out of an MBA program, hungry to prove myself, willing to do whatever it took. The firm was established but old-fashioned, stuffy, the kind of place where everyone wore expensive suits and talked about legacy and tradition. I didn't fit the mold. I was younger than most of the partners. I came from a working class background while they came from money. I didn't go to Harvard or Yale. I went to a state school on scholarship, but I could sell. And in finance, numbers talk louder than pedigree. My first year, I landed 3 major clients that nobody thought I could close. Business owners who were skeptical of wealth managers, self-made entrepreneurs who didn't trust the traditional finance world. I connected with them because I understood them. I wasn't selling them on prestige. I was selling them on results and honesty. The senior partners noticed. They promoted me to senior account manager after 18 months, then to sales director after 3 years. I built a team of 5 people, trained them, mentored them. We became the highest performing division in the company. I worked 80-hour weeks. I took clients to dinner 4 nights a week. I answered emails at midnight and on weekends. I missed family events and friendships and any semblance of work-life balance. But I was making real money for the first time in my life. 6 figures, then multiple 6 figures. I paid off my student loans, helped my parents with their mortgage, started saving for the future. The managing partner, a man named Richard Caldwell, told me I had a bright future at Paramount, that I was on track to make partner, that people like me, people who delivered results, would always have a place at the firm. I believed him. Richard was old school finance, 63 years old, been at Paramount for 30 years. He ran the company like his personal kingdom. But he'd always treated me well, praised my work, gave me opportunities. I trusted him. In my 7th year, Paramount started merger talks with a larger firm called Sterling Capital Group. It was supposed to be a partnership that would give us access to bigger clients and more resources. Richard assured us nothing would change, that Paramount's culture and people would be protected, that this was about growth, not replacement. The merger closed in February. Sterling's leadership came in immediately. New policies, new reporting structures, new expectations. They brought in their own people for key positions, started evaluating everyone based on metrics that had nothing to do with actual performance. I kept my head down and kept selling. I figured if I just delivered results, I'd be fine. I was wrong. 3 months after the merger, I landed the biggest deal of my career. A family office worth $200 million. It was the kind of client that would generate millions in fees over the coming years. I'd been working on this deal for 8 months, built a relationship with the family patriarch, understood their needs, created a custom wealth management strategy. When I finally closed it, I was ecstatic. This was the kind of win that should have secured my partnership. I presented the deal at the executive meeting, explained the client relationship, outlined the revenue projections. Richard congratulated me. The other senior partners nodded approvingly. But the Sterling executives looked uncomfortable. Their new CEO, a man named Gregory Hunt, asked pointed questions about my sales process, about how I'd built the relationship, about whether I'd followed proper compliance protocols. I answered everything. I'd done everything by the book. Every contract was reviewed by legal. Every meeting was documented. Gregory didn't seem satisfied, but he didn't say anything more. 2 weeks later, I got called into a meeting with Gregory and the head of HR, a sterling hire named Diane. Richard wasn't there. That should have been my first warning. Gregory started talking before I even sat down. Alex, we've received some concerning information about your sales practices. What kind of information? Multiple clients have raised questions about the advice you gave them, about whether you acted in their best interest or in pursuit of commissions. My stomach dropped. That's not true. Every recommendation I've made has been documented and compliant. Why, who made these complaints? We're not at liberty to share that information, but we take these allegations very seriously. Diane slid a folder across the table. We're placing you on administrative leave while we investigate, effective immediately. You'll need to surrender your access badge and company devices. This is insane. I haven't done anything wrong. Let me see the complaints. Let me respond to them. That's not how this process works, Gregory said. You'll be contacted when the investigation is complete. I looked at Diane. I've been here 8 years. I've never had a single compliance issue. This doesn't make sense. Her expression was cold, professional. The investigation will determine the facts. I was escorted out of the building that afternoon like a criminal. Security watched as I cleaned out my desk. My team members stared from across the office, confused and scared. I tried to call Richard. He didn't answer. I sent him an email asking what was happening. No response. I went home in shock. This couldn't be real. I hadn't done anything wrong. This had to be a misunderstanding. It wasn't. The next day, I got an email from Diane. The investigation had found credible evidence of misconduct. I was being terminated for cause, no severance, no references. My reputation in the industry would be destroyed. I called a lawyer immediately. She reviewed my employment contract and the termination letter. They're accusing you of breaching fiduciary duty, she said. That's serious. If they're filing complaints with regulatory bodies, you could lose your licenses. But I didn't do anything wrong. Then we need to prove that. Do you have documentation of your client interactions? Some, but most of it was on company systems. They took my laptop and phone. That's a problem. I spent the next week trying to understand what happened. I reached out to former colleagues. Most wouldn't talk to me. The few who did said they'd been told not to communicate with me. One person, a junior analyst on my team named Marcus, called me from a personal phone. Alex, I don't know what's going on, but there are rumors flying around the office. They're saying you were running some kind of side scheme, that you were steering clients into investments that paid you under the table. That's a lie, complete fabrication. I know, I've seen your work. You're the most honest person I've ever worked with. But Sterling is pushing this story hard. Now, they've brought in investigators. They're interviewing everyone who worked with you. Why would they do this? Marcus hesitated. There's talk that they want to dissolve your client relationships and reassign them to Sterling advisors, that you were the obstacle. It clicked. The $200 million family office client, the relationships I'd built over 8 years. I was the connection. If they could discredit me, they could claim the relationship was with the firm, not with me personally. They were destroying my reputation to steal my clients. I felt sick. I'd given 8 years to this company. I'd generated tens of millions in revenue, and they were erasing me to pad their own numbers. The rumors spread fast. Within 2 weeks, I was persona non grata in Boston finance. Former colleagues avoided me at networking events. Recruiters who'd once courted me stopped returning calls. I applied to other firms. Nobody would touch me. The allegations, even unproven, were toxic. My savings started draining. I had rent and bills and no income. The lawyer was expensive. Every day without work was another day closer to financial ruin. I stopped going out, stopped answering calls from friends asking what happened. I couldn't explain it without sounding defensive or bitter. I lay awake at night replaying every client interaction, every piece of advice I'd given, trying to find what I'd done wrong. But there was nothing. I'd followed every rule, I'd acted with integrity, and it didn't matter. Paramount had power and resources and a narrative. I had nothing but the truth, and nobody wanted to hear it. I fell into depression, real clinical depression. And I'd wake up at noon, spend hours staring at job postings I wouldn't apply to, order takeout and eat it alone in my apartment. My parents called, worried. I told them I was fine, that I was just between jobs. I couldn't tell them the truth, that their son, who they'd been so proud of, was being destroyed by lies. Friends stopped reaching out after I declined enough invitations. I became isolated, invisible. 6 weeks after being fired, I hit rock bottom. I was sitting in my apartment at 2 a.m, looking at my bank account, realizing I had maybe 2 months before I'd be in real trouble. I thought about giving up, about leaving Boston, about changing careers entirely, and then something shifted. I was reading through the termination letter for the 100th time when I noticed something. Now, the complaints they referenced were vague, no specific clients named, no specific transactions cited, because they didn't exist. This wasn't about misconduct. This was about business. And if it was about business, I could fight back. Not with lawyers, not by begging for my reputation back, but by rebuilding it myself. I called my lawyer the next morning. I want to file a wrongful termination suit, but more importantly, I want to request all documents related to the investigation through discovery. That will be expensive and it could take months. I know, but if they fabricated these complaints, there won't be documentation, and if there's no documentation, their whole story falls apart. She agreed to take the case. While the legal process crawled forward, I focused on rebuilding. I couldn't get hired by another firm. Fine. But I'd start my own. I used the last of my savings to register an independent financial advisory practice. No employees, no office, just me and my expertise. I reached out to former clients, not the ones Paramount had reassigned, but people I'd worked with years ago who'd moved on or changed firms. I was honest with them, told them what happened, told them I was starting fresh, and would understand if they weren't comfortable working with me. 3 of them said yes, they'd worked with me before, they knew my character. They didn't believe Paramount's story. It was a start. I worked out of my apartment, took meetings at coffee shops. I couldn't afford fancy offices or marketing materials. I just had my knowledge and my integrity. Those 3 clients referred me to others, people who valued relationships over corporate brands, and who wanted an advisor they could trust, not a faceless firm. My practice started growing, slowly, one client at a time. I also started documenting everything, every client interaction, every piece of advice, every transaction. I wasn't going to let anyone question my ethics again. 4 months after being fired, my lawyer got the first batch of discovery documents from Paramount. She called me excited. "Alex, there's nothing here, no client complaints, no investigation notes, just internal emails between Sterling executives about managing the transition." Meaning they made it up. They fabricated the misconduct allegations to fire you for cause and avoid severance. We filed an amended complaint, wrongful termination, defamation, fraud. Paramount's lawyers tried to settle quietly. It offered me 6 months severance to go away. I refused. I wanted the truth on record. The case went to mediation, then to depositions. I sat across from Gregory and Diane and Richard and asked them under oath to produce evidence of the complaints they'd referenced. They couldn't. Richard looked uncomfortable throughout his deposition. The man who'd mentored me for 7 years, couldn't meet my eyes as he admitted there were no formal complaints, that the decision to terminate me had been made by Sterling leadership based on business considerations. The truth was finally visible. They'd fired me to steal my clients. They'd destroyed my reputation to cover it up. The case settled 14 months after I was fired. The terms were confidential, but the settlement was substantial, like enough to pay my legal fees and fund my practice for years. More importantly, the settlement included a clause requiring Paramount to retract the allegations and provide a neutral reference. But I didn't need their reference anymore. In the time it took to resolve the case, I'd built something real. My independent practice had 25 clients. I was generating over $1 million in annual revenue. I worked differently than I had at Paramount. I didn't chase massive deals or work 80-hour weeks. I focused on building genuine relationships with clients who valued integrity. I hired my first employee. Marcus, the analyst who'd warned me about the rumors, had left Paramount and reached out asking if I needed help. I did. He became my director of client services. We built a small but growing firm, no corporate politics, and no merger pressure, just good work and honest service. 18 months after being fired, one of my original 3 clients referred me to a family worth $50 million. They'd been working with Paramount, but were unhappy with the service after the merger. They specifically asked for me. They'd heard about what happened. They respected that I'd fought back. I took them on as clients, provided the kind of personalized service Paramount couldn't match anymore. They referred me to 2 more families. Both left Paramount to work with me. I heard through the industry grapevine that Gregory was furious. He'd destroyed my reputation to keep those client relationships, and they'd left anyway. 2 years after being fired, my practice had grown to 60 clients and 8 employees. We were managing over $300 million in assets. I got a call from a journalist writing an article about the consolidation of wealth management firms and how it was affecting client service. She'd heard about my case, about Paramount's allegations and the settlement. She wanted my perspective. I was honest about what happened, how a major firm had fabricated misconduct allegations to eliminate competition, how the industry protected institutions over individuals. The article ran in a major financial publication. It didn't name Paramount directly due to the settlement agreement, but anyone in the industry could read between the lines. The response was overwhelming. I got calls from other advisors who'd been pushed out of firms during mergers, from clients who'd had similar experiences with their wealth managers. My practice became known as a place for people who valued independence and integrity over corporate branding. We kept growing carefully, sustainably. 3 years after being fired, Richard reached out. He'd retired from Paramount after the Sterling merger turned toxic. He wanted to apologize. We met for coffee. He looked older, tired. "Alex, I should have protected you. I knew what Gregory was doing. I should have stood up to him." "Why didn't you?" "I was afraid. I'd spent 30 years building my position at that firm. I didn't want to lose it in a fight I thought I couldn't win." "So you let them destroy me instead?" He nodded. "I'm sorry. It's the biggest regret of my career. I wanted to be angry. But looking at him, I just felt sad. He'd traded his integrity for security and ended up with neither." "I appreciate you saying that," I told him, "but I've moved on." "I can see that. I've heard about your practice. You're doing well." "I'm doing honest work. That's all I wanted." He asked if I'd ever consider rejoining a larger firm. If the right opportunity came along, I told him no. I'd learned that my reputation wasn't something a company could give me. It was something I had to build and protect myself. 4 years after being fired, Paramount was acquired again. Sterling had mismanaged the merger, and the firm was struggling. They sold to a national chain for a fraction of what they'd paid. Most of the senior leadership was let go. Gregory took a golden parachute and retired. Several of their best advisors reached out asking if I was hiring. I took on 2 who I knew had strong ethics. My practice, are now called Rivera Wealth Management, had 15 employees and managed over 600 million in assets. We'd built something sustainable, something based on trust and results rather than prestige and marketing. I started speaking at industry conferences about ethical wealth management, about building practices that prioritized client relationships over commission structures. People listened, young advisors who were disillusioned with corporate finance, experienced advisors who'd been pushed out of firms and wanted to rebuild. I shared my story, not to bash Paramount, but to show that reputation isn't given by institutions. It's earned through consistent, honest work. 5 years after being fired, I was invited to speak at my old business school. They wanted me to talk about navigating career challenges. I told the students about Paramount, about working hard and believing loyalty mattered, about having it all taken away based on lies. But I also told them about what came after, about rebuilding, about learning that your value isn't determined by your employer's opinion. One student asked if I regretted my time at Paramount, if I wished I'd started my own practice earlier. I thought about it. No, I learned everything I needed to learn there: how to build client relationships, how to structure wealth strategies, how the industry worked. I needed those 8 years to become good enough to succeed on my own. But they betrayed you, she said. They did, and it forced me to stop depending on them, to build something they couldn't take away. After the talk, several students asked about internships. I hired 2 for the summer. Both were from working class backgrounds. Both had gone to state schools. Both reminded me of myself at their age. I gave them real work, real mentorship, real opportunity, because I remembered what it felt like to be the outsider trying to prove myself. And I wanted to build the kind of firm I wished I'd found. 6 years after being fired, my practice managed over $1 billion in assets. We had 23 employees across 2 offices. We weren't the biggest firm in Boston, but we had the best client retention rate, the highest satisfaction scores, the strongest reputation for integrity. I got invited to join boards, to speak at conferences, to advise regulatory bodies on industry standards. The reputation Paramount tried to destroy was stronger than it had ever been when I worked for them. I saw Gregory once at an industry event. He was consulting now, struggling to stay relevant. He tried to avoid me, but we ended up in the same conversation circle. Someone asked him about the Sterling merger and whether consolidation was good for the industry. He gave a polished answer about efficiency and scale. I waited until he finished, then offered a different perspective. I think consolidation often prioritizes corporate profits over client relationships. The best wealth management happens when advisors have the freedom to act in their clients' best interests without institutional pressure. Gregory's face reddened. He knew I was talking about what he'd done to me, but I wasn't being vindictive. I was just telling the truth. The conversation moved on. Nobody knew our history. They just heard 2 different philosophies of wealth management. Later, someone pulled me aside and said my approach made more sense, that they were tired of firms that cared more about quarterly earnings than client outcomes. That validation meant more than any revenge would have. 7 years after being fired, I received an industry award for ethical leadership. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been fired for alleged ethical violations that never happened. Now I was being recognized for the integrity I'd maintained throughout. In my acceptance speech, I talked about reputation, about how it's not what people say about you. It's what you actually do when nobody's watching. I talked about being tested, about having everything stripped away, about learning that reputation can't be given or taken by others. It can only be built by your own consistent actions. People came up to me afterwards sharing their own stories. advisors who'd been pushed out of firms, professionals who'd been betrayed by companies they trusted. I listened to all of them, offered advice where I could, made connections, helped where possible, because I remembered how alone I'd felt, how isolated, how convinced I was that my career was over. Today, Rivera Wealth Management is one of the most respected independent wealth management firms in Boston. We manage over $1.5 billion in assets. We employ 32 people. We're not the biggest, but we're known for integrity, for putting clients first, for treating employees with respect. I don't work 80-hour weeks anymore. I take vacations. I have relationships outside of work. I coach my nephew's basketball team. I built success on my own terms instead of sacrificing everything for someone else's bottom line. I occasionally get calls from people at Paramount asking about opportunities at my firm. I'm polite, professional, but the answer is almost always no, not because I hold grudges, but because I'm very careful about who I bring into the culture we've built. I look for people with integrity, people who've been tested and stayed honest, people who understand that reputation is earned through thousands of small choices, not corporate branding. Richard passed away last year. His family asked if I'd speak at his memorial. I did. I talked about the mentorship he'd given me in my early years, the skills I'd learned. I didn't mention how he'd failed me at the end, because what I learned from him mattered. And what I learned from his failure mattered even more. I learned that reputation is the only thing you truly own in your career. Companies can take your title, they can take your salary, they can take your clients, but they can't take your reputation unless you let them. I learned that being destroyed can be a gift. It forces you to rebuild on a stronger foundation, to create something that can't be taken away. I learned that revenge isn't about hurting the people who wronged you. It's about building something so good that their betrayal becomes irrelevant. I learned that the industry protects institutions over individuals, that you have to protect yourself, that loyalty should run both ways or not at all. Most importantly, I learned that my value wasn't determined by Paramount's opinion. It was determined by the relationships I built, the integrity I maintained, the results I delivered. Paramount tried to destroy my reputation to protect their business interests. They failed because reputation isn't something you can destroy with lies. Reputation is built through consistent action over time, and nothing they said could erase 8 years of honest work. I rebuilt my reputation one client at a time, one honest interaction at a time, one ethical decision at a time. And in the process, I built something better than anything I could have achieved at Paramount. They tried to ruin me to steal my clients. Instead, they taught me that I didn't need them, that I was capable of building something real on my own. That lesson was worth every terrible moment of those first months, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, because it led me here, to a practice built on integrity, to a team that shares my values, to a life where my reputation is truly my own. If you've ever been betrayed at work, you're not alone. Where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. Subscribe to Office Revenge Hub for more powerful workplace revenge stories.